The wind in Yakutia does not simply blow, it hunts. It creeps through every layer of clothing, bites exposed skin like teeth, and reminds every living thing that survival here is never guaranteed. At minus 71 degrees Celsius, the air itself feels solid, as if breathing glass. In this frozen land where the sun barely rises and the ground remains locked in ice for most of the year, a village of nomads prepared for a battle that had nothing to do with weapons or enemies, yet everything to do with endurance, unity, and life itself. Winter had tightened its grip earlier than expected, stores were running low, and the frozen river, their ancient lifeline, held the only answer. A single mission stood before them: harvest 5,000 kilograms of fish from beneath meters of solid ice to feed an entire village through the deadliest stretch of winter. This was not a feast of celebration, it was a feast of necessity. Elders gathered quietly, their breath forming crystals in the air as they spoke. Children watched from doorways, bundled in layers of fur, sensing the seriousness of the moment. Every family understood what failure meant. In Yakutia, hunger does not come gently. It arrives with weakness, sickness, and silence. And so, before dawn, when the sky was still a deep, endless blue-black, the village moved as one. Men and women stepped onto the frozen river with tools passed down through generations, axes sharpened by hand, ice augers worn smooth by years of use, ropes stiff as frozen snakes, and wooden sleds reinforced with bone and metal. Every tool carried a story, and every person carried responsibility. The ice beneath their feet was over a meter thick, ancient and unforgiving. Each strike against it echoed across the white emptiness, a dull thunder swallowed by the cold. Breaking the ice was the first test. At minus 71 degrees Celsius, metal burns skin on contact, and sweat becomes dangerous. Too much effort could kill as surely as too little. Movements had to be measured, breathing controlled. Teams rotated every few minutes to prevent exhaustion. Frost formed instantly on eyelashes, beards froze solid, and fingers numbed despite layers of fur and wool. Still, they worked, not with haste, but with purpose. As the first hole opened, black water stared back like an eye into another world. Steam rose instantly, freezing mid-air into ghostly shapes. This water held fish that had adapted to conditions few creatures could survive. For centuries, these fish had sustained the people of Yakutia, and today they would do so again. The fishing began slowly. Nets were lowered carefully beneath the ice, guided by poles pushed through multiple holes cut in a precise pattern. This was not random labor, it was knowledge earned through generations of survival. Elders directed the placement, knowing how fish moved beneath the frozen surface, how currents flowed unseen. Every meter mattered. A misplaced net could mean hours of wasted energy. As the sun crept weakly across the horizon, barely lifting above the frozen world, the first catch emerged. Silver bodies stiffened almost instantly upon touching the air, freezing solid in seconds. There was no cheering, no celebration, only nods. The work had begun. Hours passed, not by time, but by pain. Faces burned with cold, muscles screamed under thick clothing, and the threat of frostbite loomed constantly. Women carried fish to sleds, stacking them carefully to prevent breakage. Children helped where they could, learning by watching, absorbing the unspoken rules of survival. This was not just food gathering, it was education, heritage, and resilience carved into flesh and memory. By midday, the weight on the sleds grew heavier. Hundreds of kilograms became thousands. Nets came up full, emptied and went back down. Some tore under the strain, and repairs were made with frozen fingers and quiet determination. No one complained. Complaints waste energy, and energy is life here. The cold grew brutal as the light faded, the temperature dropped further, and the wind sharpened. At this stage, mistakes become deadly. A single fall into the water would mean death in minutes. Every step was cautious. Ropes stayed taut. Eyes stayed alert. Trust bound the group tighter than any knot. As the count climbed towards 5,000 kilograms, exhaustion weighed heavily, bodies moved on instinct. The elders called for brief pauses, not for rest, but to check faces, hands, feet. Frostbite hides behind numbness, and numbness feels like relief until it's too late. Warm broth was passed around, sipped slowly, the heat spreading like life itself through frozen veins. When the final nets were hauled up and the last fish loaded onto sleds, silence fell over the river. The village stood still, breath rising in clouds, eyes scanning the massive haul laid out before them. 5,000 kilograms of frozen fish, shining faintly in the weak light, enough to feed every family, enough to survive. The journey back to the village was slow but triumphant. Sleds creaked under their burden, pulled by people and dogs working together. The village came alive as they returned. Fires burned brighter, doors opened, and voices filled the air. Fish were stored in ice cellars, stacked with care, rationed with wisdom. Nothing would be wasted. In Yakutia, respect for food is respect for life. That night, as darkness reclaimed the land and temperatures plunged again, the village gathered, not for celebration, but for gratitude. Elders spoke softly of ancestors who had done the same centuries before. Parents held children close. The fire crackled, a fragile thing against the endless cold, yet enough. This was not just an ice fishing feast. It was proof that humans, when united, can endure even the most merciless environments. It was a reminder that survival is not about strength alone, but cooperation, patience, and respect for nature. At minus 71 degrees Celsius, in one of the coldest places on Earth, a frozen village stood fed, alive and unbroken, not because the cold was weak, but because the people were strong. And as the wind howled outside, carrying the voice of the Arctic night, the village slept with full bellies and quiet hearts, knowing that tomorrow would still be harsh, the cold still merciless, but together they had already won today's battle.